Good evening and welcome to the meeting of the Palo Alto Unified School Board of Trustees. Today is February 25th and the time is 6:37 p.m. The board met earlier in closed session and did take reportable action. On item 5, the board took action in closed session to approve by a vote of 4-0 with Mr. Dauber absent the settlement agreement in the matter of Zhang versus PAUSD. The total settlement amount is $1.5 million. PAUSD is responsible for paying $50,000 through the Joint Powers Authority. We also took action on item 8. The board acted to release temporary certificated employees and directed the deputy superintendent to notify employees of release from employment effective June 5th, 2020, or the final work calendar day for that employee. The vote was 4 in favor, 0 opposed, Mr. Dauber absent. That was the report from closed session. And now we move on to our agenda. Is there a motion on the agenda order?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, students?
Aye.
Board members?
Aye.
All right, agenda is approved, and we will move on to 2A Superintendent Report. Dr. Austin.
All right, thank you. First of all, I want to just start by acknowledging the efforts of Lana Conaway and entire team of PAUSD, not only staff members, but parents and some of our outside partners for putting on the amazing Family Leadership Summit this weekend. Our numbers, loosely doubled last year. Organization was beautiful. Topics were eclectic, and sessions were packed. So it's just a top shelf effort by the entire team. So thank you. I'd like to just hit on a couple things. First of all, our process for selecting our 2 new high school principals is in full swing. We've already done the screening process, and of those screened in, we've conducted first-round interviews with Ms. Hendricks, Ms. Ofek, myself. Each of those were 45 minutes in length and dug deep. The people that are still in the process, moving along, will do panel interviews in about another week or so. The panel will have a traditional panel along with an interactive activity for candidates that we'd rather not disclose right this minute. So, but it's going to be an opportunity to expand the number of people who are participating in the process, and kind of a unique way of finding out more about who the candidates are at their core. Switching topics, pretty eclectic schedule tonight. Coronavirus. So yeah, as a transition. I wrote our county superintendent today and asked what proactive plans are in place for the county should an outbreak occur across the state of California and the United States, or more specifically our county. I was able to connect with her later this afternoon, who said that they are actually working on that right now and that all superintendents are going to receive information tomorrow. Internally, we ran reports today to check point-to-point attendance this year versus last year. For the month of February, our attendance is down 0.37, so a little less than 0.5%. So, probably statistically pretty flat. And coronavirus is not the only thing that's hitting people with illnesses right now. So we feel we're in as good of shape as we can be in for right now. But we are all nervous about what the future could bring. Switching gears again, I sent a letter on behalf of the school district from the superintendent's office to the city manager to outline some of the facts about our use of Churchill Avenue and how a potential closure could impact our operations. Just a couple highlights from the letter. We call our maintenance and operation vans, that whole set of vehicles, the white fleet, because they're all white vehicles, so we nickname them the white fleet. We have over 175 crossings at Alma and Churchill each day. So that number was more than I expected, to tell you the truth. It's a lot of traffic. And our buses do more than 20 routine crossings each day, and that is just for transportation, school, and school and back. That does not take into account field trips, athletics, or a lot of other things. And then, as we all know, Pali High School alone averages about 995 bikes per day, so roughly 1,000 bicycles a day. There was no position in the letter, and you all have received a copy of it. This is just a factual letter to provide some context. Then finally, some great news today from our PI representatives, our Partners in Education Foundation. They gave me permission to share that their goal for the year was $5.4 million to come to the school district. Not only did they exceed that number, they set a new all-time record for PI at $5.97 million. So yes, that's worth a clap. But nice thing about that, and you'll see in our budget assumption agendized item later, that already we are changing an assumption to the positive. So great news for everybody, and thank you for everyone at PI and our parents and community who continues to contribute. Thank you.
Great. Oh, thank you. All right, moving on to student board members report. Ms. Chang.
Yeah, so we got back from the 6-day long break. So there's not a lot of events, but the big thing that's going on right now is this is Mental Health Awareness and Appreciation Week at Gunn. So every day of the week, we have a different event that's hosted on the quad or during lunch or after school. So we had the Stopping the Stigma activities where we tied bows for unity or wrote down notes of encouragement. And we're having a student panel tomorrow during flex time, or sorry, on Thursday during flex time. And we have a wellness fair showcasing different kind of resources that are around campus for students. The spring sports rally was past Friday, so all the spring sports are currently in action, and a lot of the winter sports are closing out, and they had their senior nights. And right now, of note for the sport teams that are currently in CCS, the girls and boys varsity soccer teams, both of them are in the semis, and the boys varsity basketball team is in the quarterfinals, and they beat 2 seeded teams as an unseeded team, so it's pretty unprecedented there. And finally, the prom tickets are starting to sell next week, and in 2 weeks, I'll be able to disclose where the location is, but not yet.
Mr. Gordon.
Great, right to it. All right, so today during tutorial, Pali ASB hosted the Anti-Vaping Fishbowl, the first time we've done that this year. It was myself, Pooja Kella is here tonight, our ASB president, a senior student by the name of Christian Carter, and then a doctor from Stanford, Dr. Bonnie Halpern-Felsher. And this year, the goal of the meeting in attendance was every single freshman student, so we had almost 600 people in the building, was to shift away from this essentially lecture-based talks that we've been given about don't vape, don't vape, don't vape, it's bad for you, and more of having our students on stage saying, look, this isn't cool, this, we don't support this isn't our community. And so we are looking into getting feedback from that. It was a really fun event, really great. Hoping to hear good things about it. Additionally, this month, Pali ASB reviewed our election packet, and one of the elements of that was a discussion we had over multiple days whether the district board position, the position I hold, should be an elected or appointed position. So it is currently elected for those who don't know, but at Gunn, it is appointed. Yes, she is correct. Excuse me. Thank you. At Pali, it's appointed. In Gunn, it's elected. Yes, very well. So we discussed it over multiple days, and I essentially came to the student government and said, I'm essentially impartial, but I want to give the opportunity for everybody to kind of have their voice be heard. And after days of discussion, we decided that it is best as it is now. So I will stay the position will stay appointed. Additionally, ASB in the next coming weeks is holding, for the first time, an ASB job fair, essentially. So each member of our student government will sit out on the quad for one day during lunchtime with their positions in the big kind of board there, so students can come up and ask questions before they decide if they're willing to run, and if so, which positions they will run for. Along those lines, ASB elections are coming up next month. ASB conducted club visits for each of our 115 clubs over the last month or so. So we're looking forward to hear back, kind of some fun information about that. Intramural basketball is starting up next month, and then Pali basketball is playing their opening round of CCS in about 15 minutes. So very exciting. That's all for me.
Awesome. All right, great. All right, item 3A, open forum. Anyone wishing to address the board on non-agendized items may do so at this time, and we encourage you to send written comments to us, whether you speak or not, at board@pausd.org. It looks like we have 2 speakers, so each person will have 3 minutes. And the first up is Irene Yamani, and then Star Teachout. And pull that mic down to your mouth, and the timer will start when you start talking.
Okay, my name's Irene Yamane. I'm Outreach Director of Sky Schools. We're a PSN partner, a Project Safety Net partner. Our mission is a culture of peace in schools. We do this by teaching SEL and sky breathing home practice to manage negative emotions and stress. We're evidence-based by UCLA and Deakin University in Australia, and we've taught freshmen at Gunn High School for 5 years, also called Yes for Schools, for those who we changed our name recently, following the last suicide cluster. Our program is 3 weeks in PE curriculum with monthly follow-ups, and we've been 12 years in elementary, middle, and high schools in Silicon Valley. We've taught over 300,000 students worldwide. Some people ask me, why do we teach elementary kids? Do they have stress? And I'm the videographer for student testimonials, and I can tell you that I interviewed 2 5th graders who chose to use the sky breathing home practice over self-harm or cutting. We recently met with the Gunn parents, and they requested a course for adults and younger children, ages 8 through 13. And so we have a couple of courses coming up, April 7th through 10th at Mitchell Park Community Center for ages 8 through 13. And then we have a course for educators, parents, and community leaders on stress management, if anybody has stress here. And it's at Mitchell Park Community Center, March 31st through April 1st. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Star Teachout.
Good evening, thank you. And thanks also to Ms. Conaway. I attended the Saturday Summit and really enjoyed a few of the sessions I'd gone to, including the anxiety one, which was for younger children, but applicable to adults too. So it's always a disappointment when your favorite restaurant or shop closes. And it was a disappointment when our rising 9th grader was trying to select classes and we discovered that there was no middle biology lane. It was the class our 2 older sons took, and it worked great. It was challenging, but not too challenging. And so I tried to find out what happened to it. And I did learn that Pally had piloted the condensed bio and bio A. I don't know for how long they've piloted it. I couldn't find any information on it. I searched our Gunn Site Council minutes. I found there was no counseling or registration information when we attended the 2 sessions for our son. There was no search results on the PAUSD search window. I searched through a lot of the board agenda minutes, which is not easy nor efficient. I couldn't find it in there either, so maybe I'm just missing it. It would be great if we could get the attachments to the agendas in one place that maybe were more searchable, because it's very hard to find information from those. I contacted our science IL about 2 weeks ago, still haven't heard back from her. Our middle school science teachers did not know about it. They typically advise a student on which lane to take. And so in this case, it would be a regular lane or an honors lane. And they didn't have that information. I do understand that when we had 3 lanes, of course, the lowest lane sometimes gets filled with an overrepresentation of some of our HUR students. And perhaps that's why we made that change. But I do have, and I am also want to say, I'm not opposed to condensing lanes in some situations. I think it's fine. And in some cases, they work really well, like in physics. We have about 5 lanes of physics: conceptual, physics, astrophysics, AP Physics 1, AP Physics C. And so I have 3 questions. One is, I'm curious what changes in the curricula and the practices were made in this design of a consolidated class to accommodate this broader range of students. Is there any public data yet about the grade outcomes by ethnicity for the students that we might be hoping to improve their outcomes? And did we ever discuss removing the Bio H lane? Because this might be a great place to have 1 lane. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Austin, can someone from staff follow up with Ms. Teachout? And
Yes.
okay, is that going to be Ms. Ofek or?
It will either be Ms. Ofek or potentially more appropriately the IL. So
Okay.
check on that.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so that is item 3A, open forum. Moving on to item 4, approval of the consent calendar. These items are considered routine and will be approved in one action without discussion. If a member of the public wishes to comment on any consent item, or if a board member would like to pull an item, we'll consider it under action items. Do I have a motion?
I move we approve the consent calendar.
I second that.
Okay, any pulls? No? Okay. All right, student board members.
Aye.
Aye.
Board members? Aye. All right, unanimous on the consent calendar. Wow, that was quick. All right, moving on to item 5, action items. And the first up is the 2020 California School Board Association Delegate Assembly action. So this is returning to us from last time. And my thought on, in terms of voting procedure, unless people have comments or additional information they want to share, is that I'll make a motion on of a slate to approve. And then if it gets a second, we can then just amend that if people have amendments. And then once we get through a process of amending and approving, we'll have a final vote on the slate.
I do have some additional information I didn't share last time.
Then why don't you go ahead and do that first?
I didn't think about it till afterwards, and I should have shared this with you. One of the roles of the delegate for delegate assembly is to represent Santa Clara County, but also represent the Santa Clara County School Boards Association. And there's some people on this list who have been actively involved in the Santa Clara School Boards Association, and some who have not. So that's just another overlay to the comments I made before.
Do you want to say who they are?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. So myself, Cynthia Chang has not only been active, but she's also been treasurer several times. Lorena has not, she's new to her board. Jody Muirhead has been president of the Santa Clara County School Boards Association. Mary Patterson has been very active at the meetings. Carol has not yet.
Okay. All right, so I'd like to move that we, I think we vote for 4, right? So that we vote for Ms. Baden-Caswell, of course.
Thank you.
Ms. Chang, Ms. Chavez, and Ms. Muirhead.
So you make a, okay.
All right,
Okay.
so we have a second. So now if somebody wants to make a change on that, they could propose an amendment to the motion, and then
So-
we can have a vote on the amendment.
Okay, so I make a amendment to the motion that we replace Ms. Chavez with Ms. Patterson.
Okay, is there a second for that? I'll second that. Okay. All right, then so we have a vote on the amendment. So the amendment is to replace Ms. Chavez with Ms.
Patterson.
Patterson.
Can I ask why?
Yeah, I'd like to hear it. Oh,
Yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry, let's have.
Oh, okay, no,
Sorry, my
it's for the reason that I brought up before is Ms. Patterson has been active in the Santa Clara County School Boards Association meetings, has been part of discussions about different topics. Ms. Chavez hasn't yet. I assume that she will be because she's interested, but she hasn't yet.
And I can speak to my own proposal for Ms. Chavez. I think, as I mentioned last time, we're well represented, arguably overrepresented from basic aid districts among the slate, considering the composition of districts in the county. And I also think representation from Eastside Union that's a big, important district in our community, and I think it's good for them to have representation. I also had the pleasure of talking to Ms. Chavez and kind of vetted her interest and enthusiasm, and I thought she would be an excellent delegate based on those criteria. So I thought she passed muster and would be a useful person to have in this body.
And just something that I shared last time that I just want to repeat is the basic aid districts get very little airtime at CSBA meetings. So I feel like there's basically 2 districts that represent most of them. And, I'm sorry, 2 counties that represent most of them, and it's Santa Clara County and San Mateo County. And so if we don't have good representation, then we won't be heard at all at CSBA.
And also to recall the comment from last time, I think it's 6 of the 11 reps of the total contingent are basic aid districts now, so this would reduce it to 5, right? So we're done. Okay, so if no more discussion, we can call the question on the amendment. So this is the vote on whether to substitute Ms. Patterson for Ms. Chavez.
Chavez.
Okay. Student board members.
I'm going to abstain.
Board members.
Oh.
All in favor?
Aye.
Nay.
Opposed?
No.
Nay? Okay, so that, the amendment fails by a vote of 1 to 4, Ms. Baton-Caswell voting in favor and the student board members abstaining. All right, so are there other amendments to the original motion? If not, we'll call the question on the original motion, which was Ms. Baton-Caswell, Ms. Chang, Ms. Chavez, and Ms. Muirhead. Am I pronouncing that right?
Muirhead, yeah.
Muirhead. Any further comment on that? Okay, calling the question. Student board members?
Abstain.
Abstain. Board members?
Aye.
Any opposed? Did you vote no?
No, I didn't vote no.
Oh,
I'll agree with that.
okay, so 2 abstentions and 5-0 on that. So I think my designated role is I fill out the form and send it in, so I will do so promptly after this meeting. All right, thank you. So that is item 5A. And then moving on to 5B, results, bid results for the Gun and Pally Fields. Dr. Austin.
I will turn this over to Dr. Golden.
Hi, good evening. The property committee has reviewed this and have recommended submitting it to the board. There were 4 bids. We, as you can see, the board has seen this 3 times before. We're not going to do this work until May or June, and we're awarding this contract well in advance, which is good because these vendors are filling up their books of work now, and we have good bids. So we recommend you approve this.
Excellent. Shall we go around, Ms. Bain-Caswell?
No, I have no questions.
Mr. Dow? Mr. Brianza?
No questions.
Mr. Dauber?
I move that the board authorize the staff to award the contracts as set out in the item.
Second.
Okay. Student board members?
Aye.
Board members? Aye. All right. Item 5B carries unanimously. 5C, contract for wired infrastructure network refresh. Dr. House?
Yeah, this is a quietly important topic, so I'm going to ask Mr. Moore to just share a few thoughts on this before our recommendation.
Sure. Our end goal with our network infrastructure is something that's easy to manage and just plain works for everybody that needs to use it. We're excited to move forward with our refresh project to have both enough capacity for our current and future instructional and operational needs, as well as increasing the security posture of our infrastructure. Some of the current uses that we have right now and that we're planning as well are classroom presentation systems, security cameras, building control systems, clock bell speakers, in addition to extra capacity for items that are not yet on our radar, because we can't predict that far out in the future with technology. So Dasher Technologies is the vendor that installed and configured our wireless network in 2017. We're pleased to continue the relationship as the work in that project has resulted in a secure and stable wireless environment. This project builds upon the existing base components from that project, further enhancing the security and reliability of our infrastructure. So we have every reason to believe Dasher is capable of doing the same high-quality work on this project.
Great, thank you. Rather than go around, any comments on this from the gang? Is there a motion?
I move that we award the contract for the wired network infrastructure refresh to Dasher Technologies for the amount of $2,816,960.87.
Gonna say you bit off a lot with that, reading out the number.
And it will be transferred from the Measure Z reserve to fund this project.
Second.
All right, second from Mr. Brienza. Student board members?
Aye.
Aye.
Board members?
Aye.
Aye.
I'm recusing myself because I imagine that my employer might be in this market.
All right, so we have student board members in favor, 4 board members in favor, and Mr. Dauber recused. All right, that is it for item 5C. Now we're on to staff reports. Item 6A, equity staff shot. Dr. Austin.
Already with a highlight for Ms. Conway. We're going to turn it back to her for some more work that we're doing in this area.
Okay, thank you. Tonight, I just have a very brief update on the work of the Equity by Design team, which was started under the direction of Dr. Austin back in August with the goal of focusing on some of the equity initiatives that we've approached. We currently have over 25 members in that team, and those members consist of principals, teachers, classroom teachers, aides, and district office staff. So we have quite a diverse group meeting together monthly to discuss some pretty critical issues around equity that we feel require our attention. The team has been exploring barriers to equity and engaging in pretty robust conversations about equity and why, despite multiple years of focus on equity and, dare I say, equity teams, that we've done all of this work and still have not seen significant sustained change around the outcomes for certain groups of students. So we didn't answer that question, by the way, but we're certainly having some conversations about what work needs to happen to make sure that we are attending to those barriers that are preventing us from reaching the goal. But we have accomplished a few things, and one of those things is a really clear definition of equity. We were not satisfied with simply saying that we just give all students what they need. The team has determined that the work really has to focus on what has to happen at the educator level, at the district office level, at the board level, to make sure that we are moving the needle. So we've proposed one initial definition. The team wasn't satisfied, and so we're still working on a definition that everyone can agree upon. But what you will find are some consistencies in our belief that attitudes, beliefs, and values matter if we really are going to move the needle. So if you take the time to read those definitions, and I'm open to certainly getting some feedback from the board and from the superintendent's cabinet on that particular front. We've also adopted a 3-pronged equity framework, and that framework is based on 3 core areas. You learned about those a little bit at the last equity snapshot, but the culture, practice, and leadership is going to help us hone in on some specific strategies that we want to engage in to impact the outcomes that we're looking to see. And then finally, we have 6 unquestionable categories for goals for equity that no one could argue with, and that is based on really making sure that our students have high comparable achievement across the board, that there's equity in treatment and fairness, and also that we're also looking at our resources and teacher accountability and educator accountability for all students. And as always, we ask the board's continued support for the work, and we hope that you will attend our next meeting, which happens to be tomorrow evening, where we are going to further discuss some equity detours we've identified in the district to see what strategies we can provide to disrupt some of the patterns that we see in the district. Thank you.
Thank you. Board members, who's first on this? Ms. DeBrienza.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I always like to, I think we appreciate having the equity snapshot in every meeting. And it's nice to hear, I think we've all been aware of the Equity by Design team, and sometimes I've been able to drop into meetings, but more often than not been able to. So it's really nice to hear about the work you've been doing. And I really appreciate the way the group has worked to reframe the definition of equity. I suspect that this conversation about equity, which I'm really grateful for, is probably going to come up a lot of times tonight. We're going to talk about it during our college and career readiness. We're going to talk about it during our budget assumptions, and we're talking about it now, which I think is great. It should be coming up. But while we're talking about it here, I think that the work that this team is involved in is work that all of us need to be doing. And I think that all of us are doing it in different ways, in different amounts. But I really feel like, and colleagues, I'm curious to know what you think about this. I know I've said before, I think many of us have said before, that systems are set up to get the results they get, right? That we are seeing disparate outcomes that are very predictive on your income level, your ethnicity, whatnot. And so the system is set up that way. So we need to change the system, and the people at these three tables here are the people that make the system. We're not just the individuals of the system, but we're the ones that have the power to change and shift the system. We have control of the budget, we have control of the staff development, we have control of the principals meetings, whatnot. And I really think that this is the kind of work that we need to be involved in too. When I think about the changes that have to happen, I'm not super clear on exactly what has to happen. If we want to get different outcomes in the system, if we want to shift the system in some ways, we in the next couple months are making budget decisions, are approving curricula, are approving a professional development plan. And I don't feel really equipped to know if we're putting our dollars in the right place. I think that I'd feel pretty comfortable. We've talked a lot about if kids aren't reading proficiently, there are supports we can put in place that can hopefully help them read more productively. And so that I feel more comfortable with. But when it comes to the institution itself and the biases that seem to be in play, it's not clear to me what changes need to happen. And so I am really interested in being a part of this work. And I think that we will make better decisions as a board and superintendent and budget officer and assistant soups and whatnot if we're really all doing that work. So I don't know exactly what that looks like. I don't know if during a board retreat we're doing it, and if it means that executive cabinet is in these design team meetings or if there's some other kind of meeting. But I really think that as we make these budget decisions and these decisions about experiences that kids are having day to day, this is another aspect of it that we haven't really nailed down yet. And I'm really interested in talking about that when we talk about PD, when we look at our college and career readiness outcomes. But as I am working to better understand my own biases, I also want to really understand the biases that are in the system and why we are getting the disparate outcomes that we're getting. And I hope that we can find some way to do that work ourselves, not just have the Equity by Design team do it. Thank you.
Mr. Dauber. Thank you. I appreciate those comments, and I appreciate the breadth of participation in the committee, and thanks for the report.
Ms. Bade-Caswell.
I'm not sure I have much to add to what you said, but I do have to say that one thing I noticed this weekend at the Parent Leadership Forum is it really helps when you give parents pretty clear instructions about what they need to do and what they should expect us to do. And I would like to see where we're going to be doing that in PD with our teachers and staff. Where are we going to be giving them that information so that they can provide that in the classroom to the kids and to the families that they deal with every day? When I talk to parents, there's still parents of kids that fall into the categories that we're most concerned about. There still isn't much clarity on the parent side. And I think that if we're more deliberate on the PD that we're giving to the teachers on how to talk about it, how to talk about it with their students, but also how to talk about it with their parents, it will help tremendously.
Thank you. Mr. Darling.
Thank you. I want to follow up on something my colleague, Misty Brienza, said, which is that as we're creating this framework for equity, it seems to me that that framework should include the board, because we have a new policy on equity, a new board policy. I'm not sure if the board policy has yet been recommended and adopted by the board. There's a policy that was reviewed by the BPRC through a CSBA update that will at some point go in front of the board. But just to sort of foreshadow what that policy is, it includes language that discusses a desire, or a mandate to eradicate institutional bias, implicit or explicit, and it discusses the ways in which those biases flow through systematically, including in areas like facilities and technology, things that we don't really, if we're individually in our sort of silos, our areas focused on equity, we may not be focused on the bigger picture things that the board touches. So I just hope that that framework incorporates some ideas for the board. I've said before that I think the board should undergo implicit bias training, and I've said it to some tepid response, but I do think that's important because we make those decisions that, you know, may not individually be what is focused on in equity, but as a whole does in fact, at least the board policy, that proposed board policy does point to those things as being very important to equity.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Gordon.
It's always great hearing the equity snapshot coming from you and your team. One little nitty-gritty detail that I noticed. For revision 2, I would love to see sexual orientation added to the list of those. I think that, you know, if we want our students to feel comfortable and confident with essentially the term of equity that we're doing, I think that that should be included. All for me.
Great.
Yeah, thank you so much for the report. I guess I was just wondering if this team at all that's designed kind of look at the institutional barriers, is there any way in which students perhaps of these that are in these positions are able to kind of talk or give any insight they have into the system?
Yes, actually, we have done some visits to schools and hosted some focus groups. We haven't gotten around to all groups yet, but we have been getting pretty solid feedback around some of the concerns from the student lens. And if you ask students, they'll quickly tell you that everyone asks us what's going on and what's the problem, what do you need for us, you know, to have a better experience. And they're looking for the change. So we're talking about ways that we can address the students at their level.
Yeah, I think that was really kind of all that. I just think that maybe going off a little bit of topic, but I think it's just every time that we kind of, or at least when I personally try to reach out to students, it's always really, really hard to get the students that probably most need to speak about these things. And I think every time, I think there's like a feeling of every time when we reach out to them, it's because, oh, we want to hear, like we need something from them. Oh, we want to hear about how you want, what problems you're facing, but it's never, whenever there's any kind of general thing about the school, they're included in the conversation. It's always we go out when we need a specific piece of information. So I think there's a lack of kind of inclusion in just the general climate of when I have this open forum, when I have something, even the principal selection, they don't feel like they're being included. And that's just coming from a perspective from me. And so it's just, I think a lot of it has to be from our initiative when we're trying to reach out, but somehow trying to destroy the culture of we have to reach out for them, and if there's a way that we can bring them together when we're trying to accomplish these larger things about school. But yeah.
Thank you, yes.
All right, thank you. Moving on, item 6B, Career College Readiness Indicator Report, Class 2019. Dr. Austin.
All right, before I turn this one over, I want to thank the team for putting this together. That's the Educational Services and Research Evaluation and Assessment teams. I got to tell you, looking through the report and our results, I can say that we have some of the most extraordinary data in the state, both on the positive and unfortunately on the negative end. We hit the extremes like nobody else in the state of California. And the report is more evidence that averages don't tell a whole story. Our averages are off the charts. They're as good as it gets. But we also have questions around many of the topics that we just touched upon. The conclusion of the report, in my opinion, is the most important part of the entire report. So what I mean by the conclusion is probably the last few sentences that Ms. Ofek is going to say, and I'd be happy to tag on. It foreshadows a change in practice and an improvement in the systems that Ms. DeBrienza was talking about including an early warning dashboard for counselors that should be automatic and right now is non-existent in our school district. It's our belief that attitudes matter, and our realization is attitudes are slow to change, but a lack of systems is clearly within our control and can be improved almost immediately. So I do have some optimism looking forward and through this data. So Ms. Sofek.
Thank you, Dr. Austin. So I'll just start talking in the slides. Oh, there they are. This evening, we present to you the class of 2019 data as it relates to college career readiness or preparedness indicator on the recent release of the California dashboard. This report reflects the outcomes for all 1,000 PAUSD graduates in the class of 2019. Of note is that the CDE now uses the 5-year graduation data for all dashboard items, meaning that students from previous classes that took a 5th year to graduate are added to the students who graduated in on time, I say that in quotes, in the 4-year time period. Thus, the number reflected in this larger quantity of students are those who received the diplomas in June 2019, plus some extra students from previous year. Also, the data reported back to the district by the CDE is only in aggregate and not at the individual student level. This graphic on this slide is very hard to read, but you have it in a handout next to you as well, and there are some over on the side for community members. It's also available pretty widely on the web. But this graphic provides an overview of how the state determines preparedness or readiness. There are a variety of combinations of criteria that graduates can meet in order to earn a prepared on the indicator. They range from meeting standard score of 3 or better on both sections of the Smarter Balanced Assessment, known as CASP, to meeting the A to G eligibility in conjunction with one of a variety of additional criteria, such as CTE pathway completion, dual enrollment courses, passing AP exams, with a score of 3 or higher. In PAUSD, our students primarily meet this by earning A to G eligibility plus one of those additional criteria in the box at the bottom. This slide provides you with the percentages of students who attained each of the 3 possible levels: prepared, approaching prepared, which is one of the 2 things required, or not prepared. This data is broken down by student groups, and you will notice that, like much of the other data we have shared with you this year, students in historically underrepresented groups, in particular African American, Hispanics, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and students with disabilities, are less likely to attain prepared status compared to their peers. Of particular concern is the fact that only 1 of the 17 African American students in this cohort of students attained a prepared level. This data table reflects the ways in which prepared students attained that level. And then it's broken down by student group as well. Because the group size of African American students who were designated as prepared was so small, they are not reflected in this table, because I was asked that question earlier. So it's in one slide, but not the other, for a reason. A big takeaway from this slide is the participation in the annual Smarter Balanced Assessment exam. If you look right here, the column demonstrates the effect of PAUSD's poor participation rate. In addition to be eligible for the seal of biliteracy, which is that final column, a student must also earn a 3 or higher on the ELA portion of the CASP. So by not participating, you eliminate yourself from both of these possible ways of qualifying as prepared. This slide is another graphic representation of all 1,000 students according to their final status on the College Career Indicator. It shows the exact breakdown of each level. So almost 3/4 of our students, as I said earlier, were prepared by meeting A to G plus 1 additional criteria. A small number of students, only 16, were prepared, but through some other combination of options. 14% were approaching prepared, meaning that they met only one of the criterion. In this case, 13.5% met A to G eligibility, but not an additional item, and less than 1% met some other item, but not the A to G. And then in terms of the 12% of students who were not prepared, obviously they didn't meet any of those possible ways of being considered prepared. But that's the breakdown. This final slide shows some steps that we need to take as a system to address the concerns raised in relation to this data. Immediate actions to disrupt existing practices and establish new ones will unfortunately take some time to be realized, given that the data set reflects graduates of PAUSD, not current students. Actions we are already taking include thinking beyond A to G and engaging in the intentional planning of a student's college career trajectory, expanding into middle school grades with promotion of course planning that better provides an understanding of course offerings available to them, such as CTE pathways and AP opportunities. The most direct solution to improved results on the college career indicator is to increase CAS participation in high school. Efforts to increase these rates at high school is ongoing. The class of 2020, their class, did have a slightly higher rate of participation than the class of 2019. And I actually should say it's more than slightly, but a significantly different participation rate than the class of 2019. So it's possible we may see a slight increase in CCI next year. So for example, in the class of 2020, the students who are graduating this year, only 31% of African American students in the class of 2020 took the CASP test, therefore automatically eliminating this criterion as a possible way to qualify as prepared for 69% of them. Furthermore, this current senior class, Pally had a 51% participation rate in ELA and a 49% participation rate in math. Gunn had a 74% participation rate in ELA and a 69% participation rate at Gunn last year. The CASP assessment for the class of 2021 is scheduled for the week of March 16th. Which is very soon. And both high schools' administrative teams are working to communicate to students and families the importance of participating in this assessment. Finally, it is, again, abundantly clear that we need to utilize a more robust tracking system for student journeys through PAUSD. We're exploring tools that can accurately reflect student trajectories in real time so we can work with families to respond appropriately when students are falling short of meeting specified criteria. And then we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, board comments and questions, Mr. Darrow.
Great, thank you for the report. I appreciate the data and the depth. I had a question about CAS participation. Is this something that we've seen in other districts, that there's a low level of?
Only a few.
And if not, yeah, well, I guess everybody's answered, but please go ahead and answer.
No, we are the worst in the state.
Yeah.
I'm proud to be the superintendent of the two lowest participation rates in the state of California.
I will say we have made progress in the past few years. I'll tell you about we've gone from 2017 having 14 or 16% participation rate as the lowest, all the way up to 49 or 51% participation. So with some concerted efforts, we have, improved quite significantly, but it's not where it should be.
Okay, and you talked about, doing more to increase participation. What are some of the specific things that we're doing?
Sure, so both of the high schools have a letter that went out to families from their principals, and in that letter, it explains some of the ramifications of not participating. And then there's a bunch of information that goes out to students and some incentives that are used to encourage them to participate. Things like, winning like prom tickets and things like that. So there's a whole plan that goes into effect from the administration and counselors. I spoke to a counselor today who's working with her team to encourage families to participate. I think one of the biggest issues is that our families don't necessarily believe in the assessment.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, to any community members watching, I'd just like to say that the CASP assessment is very important for us to get good data. And we need good data because we need it so we can figure out where our holes are and so we can do better in making sure we're supporting all of our students. So I highly encourage those families who are hesitant about the CASP to participate.
Ms. DeBrienza.
Thanks. First of all, the report is laid out in a really helpful way. I love the data that we have here. So thank you, Dr. Kolar, and everyone who worked on it. I know at times it has been difficult to slice the data in certain ways, and I see more and more success in giving us what we're always sort of wanting to get, but is challenging for different reasons. So thank you. I also want to recognize the A to G completion rate for our low-income students is really high. It's almost what the general population is. I mean, I'd love to see it there, but it's really, I think it was 96% or something. And I think there's probably a combination of things, both us improving our reporting, but also I know that's something that our high schools have been working on and really making sure to identify when kids fall off track for A to G and get them back on. And certainly our SED population were the ones that most often were the ones that weren't reaching it. And at 96%, that's a really nice number to see. So I want to recognize that. Overall, I think you said it best, Dr. Austin, it's like the averages don't tell the whole story, but certainly there's a lot of really good data here, and I'm glad to see it. I think that seeing our data among our African-American students is really telling in a lot of ways, right? It looks like if the reason they're not determined college and career ready is because they didn't take the CASP, which it sounds like obviously there's a lot of students that aren't taking the CASP, then if that was the only thing precluding them, they'd be at that approaching, right? So even if you combine the approaching and the prepared, we're still at like 28%. We oftentimes, if the board has questions, we try to make sure everyone gets the answers to these. And I just caught Dr. Kolar right before our meeting, and we ran the numbers and found out that this year, if you look at the Black students who are seniors this year, fewer than 40% of them qualify as as SED, as low income. So we are looking at numbers that are, for our Black students, that are worse than our SED students, which often we talk about, well, maybe our SED students don't have the same resources or need more supports in different ways. So even our kids who are of the same income as many of the rest of Palo Alto are not meeting these standards at the same rates. So I think this just speaks to that system getting different outcomes for different kids, and not because the resources are different. But if your skin is the color of the colors of the Black kids in our district, you're a lot less likely to have either be approaching or have reached college and career readiness. So I think that's just another indicator that it is a small sample size, but it's pretty clear that there's a big difference there. That's it. That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Dauber?
Thanks for the report. I'm curious about what Dr. Austin, you indicated in your remarks about specific responses. And I think you were pointing to this kind of early warning system for counselors. Can you describe a little bit more what you have in mind?
Sure. The tool takes, let me back up. We were looking to find out what is keeping people who do care from being on top of these things in a way that we were struggling to understand. And what we found is that there's not a clear dashboard that some districts have that essentially push notifies to counselors when there's an issue. And we just recently found a tool. Ms. Ofek and I went through an extensive demo, and it's used currently in Houston Independent School District. It was written by a high school student for his own high school. He's in college now. He's a sophomore at University of North Carolina, and he scaled it. And essentially, he took the guesswork out of it. It uses our own data, pulls from that, filters into a report. So as a counselor now, I can look at what they call a flag report and the flag report will show anyone who has popped in who has either just earned a D, an F, has poor attendance, a variety of different, caution flags. And then the counselor will look at this report and can instantly either say, I need to see this student, or can mark it as resolved, meaning that they know that they're on top of it, whatever the reason is that you might mark resolved. But it just really takes the guesswork out. And I can see this is a tool that has redundancy built into it. I could have an assistant look at that and run the report. I could expect the counselor to look at it, and as a principal, I can look at it, look at the same data to make sure that we're on top of it. And most importantly, in a district that is systems poor in a lot of places, we would have exactly the same warning system at Pally that we would have at Gunn and be able to monitor from here. So it looks like a real winner. So we're going to be bringing that forward for consideration very, very soon for the board.
Oh, that's great. I'm happy to hear that. The other issue that's called out here is AP course enrollment, which, there's large differences that we're seeing there. Are there plans to address that issue? And if so, what are your thoughts?
So a couple things. Looking at the data, there's certainly an opportunity. I would say it has not been an explicit goal in the past, and it's something that I think is, you're going to hear this a few times tonight, but I think as Kathy Lawrence transitions into a director of secondary ed and we have a transition of 2 high school principals on top of that, there's a real opportunity here for us to look at these opportunities. I would say that data jumps out in a way that most districts would circle that and bullseye it as an access issue.
Can I piggyback on that? So we do have a proposal that came forward from an AP physics teacher to reorganize those AP physics courses to increase access, to break them apart. There's AP physics, there's like A, B, and C. So there's, I wrote about it in a weekly, in January, I think, where we're gonna pilot that to see if enrollment increases and shifts to being more open access oriented. So we have a couple of places where we're trying that. Also the AP computer science. So.
Yeah, I think it's important that we not, that our, differentiated lanes not turn into, differences in opportunities and stratified by demographic characteristics. I think that's a real red flag. So clearly that there's a red flag here. I'm happy to hear that that's going to be addressed. I'd love to see continued reporting to the board on that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. One of the things when I looked at this, for us, so that we get a good score on the dashboard, we could raise our score significantly just by making sure we had more kids taking the CASP. And I want to talk about the other side of that too, because that shouldn't be our only goal. When I talk to other districts, they have different policies than we have. And our policies seem to be very focused on making people feel like they should take it, that it's good to be part of the team, that it's good to be part of making, giving us good data for our district. I think that's all fine, except other districts don't stop there. There's actually some negative things that happen if you don't take the CASP at many districts around here. And I wonder why we're reluctant to go copy some proposals, some of the policies from other districts. I mean, I just look at Santa Clara Unified and Mountain View Los Altos, and like they're not having the same issues we're having, but they have very similar kids, particularly Mountain View Los Altos. So I know in the past we've thought, well, we can use positive reinforcement. If we have a lot of carrots, people will do the right thing. But we're still not at the numbers. At 90 or 95% that we need to get up. It's 95%. I just feel like the carrots are good. We shouldn't stop there. But we maybe need to be a little tougher on the other side. I don't know, Dr. Austin, how you feel about that policy-wise.
Just quickly, I think your policies need to reflect your community, and our community may be different than the others as far as expectations. I think in this particular case, carrots are carrots, whatever. I think we just need to tell a better, more compelling story, to tell you the truth. I think our students are pretty smart, sophisticated, and if we tell a better story, we'll probably get a better result.
I don't know, I feel like our story's improved over time. I think we told a pretty good story at Gun last year. Yet, I was at a Gun PTA meeting and a PTSA meeting, and I have to say that the all for one for all was not there on this. So it's just something to think about. I don't think we have to answer it here. But maybe we just need to see what the policies are at those districts around us and evaluate whether some of those things might be worth doing here. On the other side, I love the early warning system. I thought we had one, so I'm really happy that we're going to put one in place. I mean, I thought we were tracking kids with D's and F's and, notes went home to parents, and but whatever, if we haven't had it, I'm really glad we're going to put something in place. There's something else that we might want to talk about as part of that, and that is, I really think that it's not just AP classes, but it's also these dual enrollment classes and getting kids and families aware early about how you get in there. There are many, many kids that no matter how much we divide physics down will never take an AP physics class. They just won't. It's just not their area. And they might not take AP computer science either, but they might take AP music theory or AP environmental science or AP English language. I mean, I feel like every student could use AP English language. We could all use understanding grammar better, understanding writing better, just understanding how you use and manipulate the English language. So I'm hoping that we'll encourage kids. Cappuccino High School has a policy where every kid has to graduate with at least one IB class. I think we can do that. Our kids do really well on those AP tests if they've taken the class. So I encourage us as part of the early warning system or the early counseling system to really have very specific conversations with families about how their kid can get that one AP class or that multiple AP class or the dual enrollment. And you have to start planning that early. That's not something you can just spring on a family who hasn't been thinking about it in senior year. You can't suddenly say, oh yeah, you should do this, because you're not ready for it. And you may be academically ready, but you might not be sort of culturally ready to go on something like that. Oh, and I just had one question. This is just a numerical question. On slide 4, the A through G completion rates for all students for us is 97.8, so basically 98%. That's not what we're giving to the dashboard, right? Because there's another place where it said we were 88% at Pally and 91% at Gun, so that average is sort of 90-ish.
So you're on the slide that has most students earn prepared through A through G?
Yeah, just the first thing that says 97.8 under A through G completion for all students.
Right.
Is that our number for our graduation?
This is 1,000 kids, which is more than the kids who graduated in class of 2019. It's 5 years of student data. And so some students have a fifth year in this.
Right, but
so
it's still like 8 points higher. So I'm just like, kids that took another year to graduate, that brought us up that much of a percent? Okay,
that's what the data says.
and that's the data that we gave to the dashboard?
That's pulled from CalPADS.
You don't compile this data, right? You get this data from the state.
Correct, it's reported back to us based on what we report to CalPADS.
So we reported the 88% and the 91%, and then they added in that fifth year and got to 98%?
Yes. No?
Why don't we not answer
Why
that
don't we
right
answer,
now
why don't we
and
get
come
back to you on that?
Okay, I didn't understand how we got there. If someone can explain it outside of
We'll
this
get
meeting,
back
that
to
would
you
be
on
great. Thank you so much.
All right. We'll do student board members, and then we have public comment, and we'll have one speaker. Ms. Chang? Are you-
Sure, yeah, I can go first. So on the CASP testing, because I was a student at Gunn, and I'm proud to say I was one of the 74%.
You're still a student at Gunn.
Still a student.
Oh, yes. Sorry, sometimes yeah. I am still a student at Gunn.
Second semester senior.
Yes.
I don't know, maybe- Yeah, maybe not. Ask your teachers.
I went to all my classes today. So last year, I think basically the PTSA did this push through all the history classes, and they essentially told the students the benefits of taking the CASP test, and they introduced us to, you would be eligible for the seal of biliteracy, the diploma, and also, I think they mentioned funding, and then they talked about the ranking of the school. And so those are the four kind of main, the story that they were telling. And then I think, well, obviously students were reluctant to accept that to begin with. And then I think this like, a group of pretty just determined not to take this test group of students, they kind of went and did the research. I've never seen a group of students that passionate about something besides not taking a test. So they probably spent more time that it would have taken to take the test to do research about why not to take the test. So they really dug into the data, and they were kind of looking at how like, they essentially were there was this one thing message that I think a lot of students saw from Gunn that was basically saying we don't get a lot of funding from throughout like taking the CASP test. I think it was like Title I funding, and it's not a huge amount of our funding. And basically the story they were saying is, oh, like this, the story that the district or the teachers are trying to sell us is over-exaggerated, like from this one point, therefore everything else is kind of over-exaggerated, overblown, and the ranking is not really true, or whatever. That was kind of the stuff that I saw. And so from that, I think there were a lot of students that were, I think there was a lot of confusion about the benefits of the CASP testing. And so from there, the stuff got murky, and then a lot of students decided not to take it. And also there were students that wouldn't have taken it regardless of what you said. So I guess like from my perspective of as a student going through the process, I think the most compelling arguments, not necessarily is I don't know how true the funding is. I understand that we do get some, but it's not a significant amount, and that's not the biggest reason for the CASP. But I think more should be talked about in terms of this is crucial data that we need to assess the school and see how we're doing, not just to improve your classes, but especially for students of historically underrepresented communities. I think this is like critical data. I mean, I remember a couple of, I think it was just weeks ago when we had this CASP testing presentation, and essentially we were saying, well, we can't really trust the high school data because the participation is not good, and also the students that do participate aren't putting the effort into it. And I think that's just a very clear example of how that literally impacts how decisions are made. And so if a story can be told about how this data impacts how policies are made in school, specifically for students that are in pretty vulnerable positions, I think that's one thing that I found pretty compelling for me. I think the number two thing was I heard this change is happening from, so originally if you didn't take the test, you kind of got this, you didn't take this test, you don't get a score. But I hear that there's a change in if you don't take the test, you actually get the minimum score. I don't know if that's
So the lowest obtainable scaled score is assigned to make up the difference between our actual participation rate and the 95% required. So it's not like you, if you don't take it, are going to get it, but our district will be penalized in that way.
But yes.
So essentially what I'm hearing is it's going to impact our school more than it ever has, or the district more than it has before. And I think that is something that should also be communicated to the students. And the third thing was, I think just a lot of it is the ranking stuff, I think to a lot of students doesn't really sell, like the whole, do this for your school, we want our school ranking, because, I mean, like 196 ranking on one kind of list is like, it doesn't matter to them. So I just, I think a lot of it is just how can we compel students, and to some degree, I kind of agree with what Ms. Caswell is saying. I don't know if positive reinforces of, oh, we give you a barbecue and you can have a raffle, that necessarily has worked in the past. And I don't know what kind of maybe negative reinforcers or whatever would be in place, but I just think that maybe the story we're selling in the past hasn't really been that compelling, but I just think that there are some other things that we need to push out about how the CASP benefits students besides funding and besides kind of the ranking. Yeah.
I wanted to start by saying I was very impressed by your usage of reinforcement. At first, I was like, what is she talking about? And then I remembered about our psychology course. For me, when I first got to look at this, I had never heard of the CCI. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know why it mattered, and I didn't know why I should care about it. And over the last couple of days, I've come around to kind of learning more about it, did a little bit of research on it. But for the students at my high school, and I'm sure Gunn's the same, I'm sure they haven't heard about it either. And they're probably stuck in this cycle of, what is it? Why should I care? And especially with the CASP test. Kids don't know what the test is used for, what's on it, why it matters, and why they should take it. And so if they don't understand this information, we can't expect them to care. We can't expect them to show up on test date, and we can't expect them to, put their best foot forward, I guess you said, about the minimal effort being given. And in terms of the students that are falling through the cracks, per se, I could very easily see a one-on-one quick 5-minute conversation between them and the counselor. We gather however many students, in our targeted groups and saying, here's 5 minutes of me telling you what this test is. We would love you to take it, and let the kids have that, take that information and do what they want from it. Because right now, if we're not having that conversation, it reverts back to that idea of they don't know what it is. Why should they care? So, as a district, if we're not telling these kids that this is important, that, an outline of what it is, like they said, I don't think that the barbecues and the free Pally t-shirts are going to do it this year. So those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Why don't we take public comment? Naomi Haskalovici. Help me out, Naomi.
Hi, my name is Naomi Haskalovic. I did not plan to talk, but I'm talking because of the physics, actually. I think there is an issue with gatekeeper. It will be biology, chemistry, and the big words. And the big words are very intimidating. And if you look at geometry even, compared to other languages that I know, there are many words to learn, new words that are not used anywhere. And some teachers are not very patient with even spelling. I think I forgot to mention that I'm instructional aide in special ed. So I actually came and spoke because of this. I doubt that I will learn physics here in this country. I think that everything connects. We go back to the equity. We go back to the achievement gap. Some of you have been here in those circles over and over and over. And there are some prerequisites that I believe I don't think that anything will change. Maybe not everything will change. This will change, but nothing can change before the prerequisites are being done and addressed. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for this report, and thank you for everybody for all the thoughtful and insightful comments. I guess I just wanted to add, so the boards, I've heard boards go on and on about both minority student achievement and career and college readiness in particular, as well as CASP participation year after year after year. I mean, it is one of the oldest refrains in Palo Alto. And, to me, part of it shows how ineffective, how unimportant board sentiment is in actually moving the needle on a lot of these things. No amount of hand-wringing and, gesticulating on the board's part is going to meaningfully move the needle on some of this stuff. What will is staff action, and in particular, action at the site. And that's why I think, principal appointments are, in some, the most important thing the board does is hire the superintendent, and the most important thing the superintendent does is assign the principals. And I think that's nowhere more true than at high schools, where they're so complex and the kids need so much guidance and direction, and things can go so wrong, and there's no time left for course corrections. So I think, focusing on getting those principal hires, people who have high/fanatical standards, and are committed to the kind of detail-oriented execution that it takes to actually move the needle on this stuff. Because this isn't about talk and, I mean, some of it is, you know, institutional bias and implicit whatever, but it's about someone checking the spreadsheet every day and making sure that what was supposed to get done, got done. And if it didn't, then making sure that it gets done and not waiting until next year or next month or next quarter or next whenever, but making sure it gets done right away. So I'm really looking forward to seeing that at I think that's what it will take to move the needle on things like this. And so I'm hopeful that we'll take those, take opportunities with those key hires to move the needle. Did you want to say something? You can.
I'm really concerned. I'm really concerned that, of course, the principals matter, and of course, making sure we do the specific work to support kids. But when our Black kids are almost guaranteed to not graduate college and career ready, even if you bring in the CASP scores, almost guaranteed. It's more than just, did their teacher have the right dyslexia training in second grade, or did their principal come to them when they wound up on the DF list? It is so much more than that. And until we are willing to do that work as well as the work of making sure that our teachers are all ready and our principals are all ready, we're not going to fix this problem. And we're going to still require all of our students of color to be swimming uphill while trying to jump through the CASP scores and the AP classes and everything else. So I really think it's a both and, or we're doing all kinds of things to try to fix it while we're still having them swim upstream.
Okay. All right, moving on to item 7B, middle school science instructional materials adoption. Did I miss something? Oh, no, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, my bad. Boy, getting enthusiastic here. I'm sorry, draft budget assumptions, my bad. 7A, draft budget assumptions, Dr. Austin. Sorry, Ms. Chow, didn't mean to skip over you.
We thought there was so much confidence in Ms. Chow that we were just going to say looked good.
My apologies.
Okay. Budget assumptions. Before I turn it over, budget assumptions are a process that Ms. Chow and I are both very familiar with, in a way to get into some discussions with the board that have been missed in the past. Our professional development plan, just so you know, is scheduled to appear at our next board meeting and will probably be a source of some high interest. So that is a subset of the budget assumptions, but we're not going to get into detail on that tonight. The staff role, just so I'm setting expectations for our staff, after Ms. Chow's brief presentation, is to listen for requests that will assist in future decision-making for the board, but probably very limited answering questions on the fly. So that, you know, you're going to probably have some areas where you're going to wish that you had some more information to understand or to help you with future decisions. We're going to take notes and get that back to you. It's part of the reason you're going to see this item a few times. Practically speaking, also, when you see this in the future, I mean, Ms. Chow and I haven't discussed this at length, but typically you'll see any revisions through strike-throughs. You'll be able to see this as kind of a document that builds on itself until final approval in April. All right, so with that, I'll turn this over to Ms. Chow to lead us through, and we'll give this our first shot on budget assumptions.
All right, thank you, Dr. Austin. So our next item is the budget assumptions. This is a draft. This is the first glance, first opportunity that the board has to see this document. It will, you will have further opportunities to give input on it. It will be at the March 17th board meeting, as well as the March 31st board meeting, and then will be brought back in the April 21st for board approval. So I just want to know that there are several opportunities for this to come before the board, and that is intentional because this is the first time that we're utilizing this type of budget development tool. By means of introduction with our budget development tool is meant to be provide clarity around the practices and procedures that are currently supported in our budget. It's not meant to be a wish list for items that we want to see in the budget, but rather to define current structure and framework around those things and practices that we currently do. As we move forward with budget development, the important work that we will be starting on very soon in the spring, we intend to use this as a framework for our budget development. So as we move into this discussion item, just a little information is that the assumption document is organized into 4 different categories. So what you're seeing up on the screen is the very same document that is attached in the board packet. The numbering is identical, and it's just meant to provide clarity depending on where you're sitting this evening. You can use either reference point, the projection, or your board agenda packet. So the 4 categories, what I'd like to do is give a brief overview on each of those. And then after we go through the 4 categories, I'd like to turn it over to the board for questions and comments, because I do know that the board will have those this evening. So our first category on the budget assumptions are the general assumptions. So these are items 1 through 4, and these really speak to kind of our guiding principles that we're utilizing as we're developing the budget. So plainly stating, we are developing our budget to align with the PAUSD promise. We are using recommendations from our partners in professional school business organizations, such as School Services of California, AXA, SF Squared, CASBO, the county office, as well as our own district fiscal advisory committee, which will be reviewing this. I also want to point out that this item, that this budget assumptions document is a dynamic document. So right now, and each time you see it, it will be based upon the most current information that we have at the time from our various sources. But know that as that information changes, so will the underlying assumptions. So when the May revise comes out, in the middle of May, we will likely see some revisions to our underlying assumptions, as we will when we see updates from other sources, such as the assessor's office. As we go through this document, you will see in some areas dollar amounts are just notated as a placeholder, and they will have an X to notate that that information is still pending or we haven't received it yet. Also to note that the 2 meetings in June will be when the budget has a public hearing. That's the first meeting, June 9th. The second meeting in June is when the budget will be presented for adoption by the board. Our next category of assumptions in this document is around the ending fund balance. And these are items 5 through 8. And what we are really acknowledging in this section are the ending fund balance. We have board policy that speaks to what we have in reserve level. The district has a 7% reserve that is required, and that is held in Fund 17. It's part of our ending fund balance. This is in addition to the state's required reserve for economic uncertainties of 3%. So our total reserve is a 10%. We also have, in the ending fund balance, other designations, and those include carryover from unspent allocations. So know that our ending fund balance will have carryover. When we close the books at the end of the year, that carryover will be brought into the budget at the appropriate time, which is at first interim. When we're looking at the fund balance, it will be an estimated amount. The ending fund balance that we will be using for budget development becomes the beginning balance for the 2021 school year. And right now we have information on first interim, so that's what's posted. As we finalize second interim and bring that to the board at the next board meeting, you will see that information posted in that column there for second interim. So that is information that you will be seeing at our next revision. The same is true for our restricted ending fund balances and our expenditures. When we close we will use estimates for those amounts, and when we close the books in September, we will revise the budget with those actual amounts. Now, moving on to the section in our document that speaks to our revenue assumptions. This includes items 9 through 18. Covers the assumptions around the state COLA, the cost of living adjustment, for those programs that are adjusted by the COLA, the property tax revenue assumptions, assumptions around the lottery rate, the state lottery, mandate block grant reimbursement rates, interest revenue, special ed revenue that is received from both state and federal sources, as well as our federal categorical fundings for Title I, II, III, and IV. There's also a revenue assumptions there on our local donations, and those specifically are our PTA donations, as well as assumptions around the Measure A parcel tax revenue. So those are all identified in this revenue section. Now, our last section in this document is the section that speaks to assumptions around expenditures. So this covers items 19 through 45. It's the largest section. And the intent here is to identify and even serve as a resource or a communication tool for our student programs, as well as personnel and staffing allocations. So our primary focus is on our student programs. Our primary expenditures are on our staffing, so both of those are represented there. Again, our goal is, with our expenditures, is to build structure around our current practices and procedures that are currently in our budget. Now, I do want to call out, there are 3 items in this section that are new, will be new in the fiscal budget for 2021 year that are not in our current budget. The first item is item 25. This is the item that speaks to our bus drivers and the increase in hours. So we have a team of bus driver positions, a group of bus driver positions that are in the 5-hour per day. In order to better serve our students, we are proposing to increase that to 7 hours a day. We believe that this is the best way to provide services, improve our services to our students. It is imperative that our students get to school every day on time, that our students are picked up from school every day on time, and that we minimize the amount of time that our students spend on those transportation routes. So the best way to provide this is to increase those hours so that we can meet the needs of our transportation clients. The cost for this increase in hours is estimated to be $165,000. The next item that is new in this expenditure assumption list, and this item was approved by the board at a couple board meetings ago, but I just want to call it out because it is a new item. This is the increased participation in the middle college program. This is a program that we run with Mountain View Los Altos High School District. We participate in this program with them. We will be, we've worked with the high school district. They've doubled their participation, meaning that they have hired twice as many teachers to run the program. And in return, we are able to enroll twice as many students in that. So this is something that, as I mentioned, was approved a couple board meetings ago. The increased cost for the expanded programming is just over $155,000. Our third program that is a new expenditure is item 27. Oops. And this has to do with, no, sorry, wrong number there. is item 29. And this is around the increased special ed program specialist in order to serve sites that have a high volume of IEP students. The rationale here is that we have a desire to strengthen our IEP processes and expand the continuum of support and services in the program for our students. Now, the last item that I want to speak to is not an increase in expenditures, but it is something that Dr. Austin mentioned earlier this evening in the superintendent's report, and that is item 43. And this is a call out to the tremendous work that has been done by the PI Foundation in boosting their donation for the 2021 year to $5.97 million. So here this is an example of something that we will see brought back as a positive revision. This information was in here based on the information that we had at the time. When we bring this back at the March 17th meeting, we will revise it to the $5.97 million amount for the annual donation, as well as update the allocations for the elementary schools, the middle schools, and the high schools. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to the board for their input on these items.
Thank you. We have one card on this, so why don't we take public comment first? Meb Steiner.
Good evening. I'm Meb Steiner. I am president of CSEA, representing classified staff. First, I want to just start off by thanking Ms. Chow for a great presentation, also for our Fiscal Advisory Committee, where Ms. Baton-Caswell is heading that up for us, and all the folks who serve on that. And having these assumptions, I think, is really helpful to kind of guide our thinking. I also really appreciate the conversations that I've had a chance to have with Ms. Chow and with Dr. Austin and at the Fiscal Committee. I have a couple quick points that I may or may not get to. So what I want to start with really is about our bus drivers. And I actually want to recognize that 2 of our bus drivers are sitting here tonight. These are incredible employees. They have probably the toughest job in the district. Nowhere else do we ask one adult to supervise 60 kids on a big bus, 60? No, 60 plus kids, or transport our special needs kids and drive a bus at the same time. We just would never do that when we do staffing ratios. I cannot emphasize enough how valuable our bus drivers are and how many of them have been with us for, some of them for decades. And so I was very, very, very happy to see that this is a priority in the budget. This has been a problem for some time. I've spoken about it in the past, the 5 hours. It's not just 5 hours. It is a 5-hour split shift, and they make between $25 to $30 an hour. And if you take healthcare benefits and they are prorated, our bus drivers basically, their salary goes to buying a family medical plan. So I'm very, very appreciative of increasing it to the 7. It'll serve our kids, and it will also serve our really, really important employees. But most important, and it'll also serve our district because it's critical that we are competitive. We are not being able to recruit or retain drivers. We've lost 3, I believe, this year. We've lost a few before that. We are down to pretty critical numbers. And we've got everybody driving right now, the driver trainer, the dispatcher, and in fact, the head of transportation at times. So just to make sure that our kids make it to school. So I want to really thank them, the 2 that are here tonight. They will be up at 6:30 a.m. getting those buses ready. So, and I want to just thank the board and Ms. Chow for making this a priority. And the other things I'll leave to another time. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Baton-Caswell.
Great. Ms. Carroll, I want to thank you because, well, specifically because every year I've been on the board, we've had a rollover budget first to look at, but we never had this level of detail as to what the assumptions were underneath. So I think that in the name of transparency, this is very helpful. It's very helpful for a lot of people. I also want to thank our 2 bus drivers. You just stand up. I appreciate that you came to the meeting tonight. We appreciate all you do. I know the bus drivers actually have eyes in the back of their heads, and they know everything that's going on, even though they're facing forward. It's amazing. Also glad to see that we, I thought maybe the San Mateo County of Education provided something that we weren't getting in our own county. I was interested to know what that was. What would you like from us tonight on this? Because this is the assumptions behind your rollover budget. Are you asking us to make comments on what's in here, or are you asking us for additional information? What are you asking us?
So I wanted to recognize that this is the first time that the board is seeing this. So I wanted to give the board an opportunity to express comments, concerns, and provide input on items that you felt strongly about. So and that's why, for that same reason, Dr. Austin and I felt it was important to bring it back several times, because what's happened in the past is that when the budget is presented, there isn't time to hear those comments and concerns or make any adjustments to those and incorporate them into the budget, except for, give you a response that, well, we'll address it at first interim. And I think this is just a much better opportunity for the board to weigh in on that. So this was an opportunity for the board to give feedback to us and then incorporate that feedback to the next revision at the next 2 upcoming meetings.
So at this meeting, though, we don't want to talk about programmatic wishes. We're just talking about where we are in the basics. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you added a couple of things, but they're not really programmatic per se. I mean, making sure that our bus drivers, that we have enough bus drivers and that we're paying them correctly. That, to me, that's not really a programmatic thing.
It's not necessarily programmatic, but I did want to put this in here because it will be an increased cost in the budget. So as a matter of going forward and calling out, defining our program and defining what those costs are going forward, I thought it was important to have those changes in here.
And I really appreciate that you spelled them out. One thing I was surprised about was that we don't save any headcount by sending 30 kids to middle college. And I know that the per child allocation at middle college is less than the per child allocation for our district, but that's such a small number that doesn't change our allocation. Mm-hmm. Okay, I think some people would be surprised by that, and I think that's good that it's called out here. I'm thrilled we're doing more middle college because it's a great program, and for many kids, it completely changes their ability to get through high school. And teachers there are awesome, so if we can clone them, that's even better. So I don't have any, for me, this is a level of clarity and transparency that's above what we've had before, but there's nothing in here that I have particular questions about beyond what I just said. So thank you.
Great. Mr. Darrow.
Thank you. And thank you for the report, the draft budget. It was very helpful. And I wanted to specifically talk about the equity piece, as we've been talking about equity today. It seems like we have these 3 areas in the 3 equity initiatives that are called out, that are included in this budget. At the same time, we have these discussions, as we had earlier, about what the equity by design team is doing and looking at a framework that's more of a systemic framework. And so it seems like really these are the only 3 things that are going to be allocated any money. And that goes at odds, I think, with what the work the district is doing to roll out equity initiatives, broadly and on a systemic level. So I would like to see more under this equity thing, because it just seems like the only money we're willing to put towards equity are in these 3 areas, which I think clearly is not true, as has been stated by the board and all the reports we've continuously been getting over the course of the last academic year. And, you know, I share my colleague, Ms. DiBrienza's urgency when it comes to approaching equity as more than just numbers-driven results, even though numbers-driven results are key in closing the achievement gap. In fact, the achievement gap is only one of the goals that is in our new board policy, which Ms. Vishakin did confirm that we did pass and adopt at the last meeting, which is BP 415. And that's our equity policy. And that equity policy has a lot of shall language that mandates how the board makes decisions and what the district is supposed to do to ensure that systemically underrepresented students are being taken into account when we're actually building these supports on, again, a systemic level. So it's a new policy. It's one that I think the Equity by Design team is taking into consideration in building these systemic frameworks. And again, one I think that should be reflected in our budget items for equity. Thank you.
Ms. DiBrienza.
Thanks. I would like to echo that I love to see the set of assumptions at this timetable. I think it's really helpful for us to see some of these things in sort of your proposed budget in another few months. The first 2 or 3 times I've done this on the board, that's kind of how we've seen it, and it's been like, but what about, wait, is it too late to change that? And so I really appreciate seeing this here and giving us a chance to talk about it. I hope this is the reason you brought it up. A couple things jumped out at me that I have questions or comments about. One is the lunch that we're providing in the morning, and you and I briefly talked about this at the Leadership Summit. That started, I believe, when I first joined the board, and there was conversation about who requested that. Do people really want it? There were some families in our Tinsley program who said, I'd much rather that money go to tutors or other supports. Other families maybe were really excited about it. So if breakfast in the morning before school is something that is used by students and it's how they're getting their breakfast in the morning before they tackle their academics, by all means, I would love to see it continue. But I do think it's sort of no decisions about us without us. Are those families actually wanting us to be serving the breakfast? Or would that $150,000 better go elsewhere? And it looks like it's happening at some of our schools, but not all of them. I think that started because some of them were identified as having a critical number of kids that got Title I funding, but has that changed over time? Or are there other schools that could use it? So I would love to see us, before we commit this money in this way, really just make a real clear decision about, yeah, this is what we want to be doing and this is how. And we either want to expand it or shrink it or change it or whatnot. I have a question about sort of our class size staffing budget, which Dr. Austin, you and I briefly touched on, just because I have a kid in elementary school. And I found this really interesting. I think the numbers as they are currently for class sizes changed when we went to all-day kindergarten. And it shrunk the kindergarten classes down to 19. If we are really setting the budget as though all classes really have 19 in kindergarten and 21 in first grade and 23 in third grade, at least from my experience at my kids' elementary school, that's not happening, because if there's 19 in each of the 4 kindergarten classes, when they go into first grade, there's like around 19 in each of those classes, right? And if there's a kid that overflows from somewhere else, they come in there, but it's not low enough that we can collapse a class, but it's not high enough that it's actually at that site anywhere near 23 or 21 or whatnot. So I know that some of these numbers are locked into our contract, and I wouldn't suggest that we, go against that in any way. But I do wonder if, one, over time, do we want to rethink what that looks like? And also, even in the moment, as we're just calculating numbers, even if it's what's in the contract, if we know that in our schools, even though we can have 23 kids in third grade, we really only have about 20 because we started with 19 in each and there was some attrition and some additions and it's around 20. I think we should be setting our budget that way unless we're going to plan on moving kids from one school to another to make the numbers actually match that, which I don't think we want to do. So I guess just one is, do we want to think about that over time? And two, let's make sure, even though those are our contracted averages, if that's just not what we're getting in our schools, I think it's important to make sure that when we're making our budget, we're allowing for that staffing difference. I appreciate seeing the bus driver shortages. You both have talked about that with us. It's not the sexy thing on the budget, but it's obviously a really important thing, and it's going to sort of make sure our kids are getting where they need to go, when they need to be there. It's going to provide more consistency and predictability for our students and our teachers and our administration and our parents and everything else. So that's great if that can make the transition to and from school run more smoothly. That seems like money really well spent. Just to clarify, I think, aren't we doubling middle college from 30 to 60? Yes. Okay, it looked like it said we were bringing it to 30. It just might have been a typo in there, but I was confused by that. I appreciate the identifying the $900,000 in PD as sort of this couched budget. And I know when I first joined the board, just recently before we got on there, there was this PD budget set aside that we were kind of working down. And I've been anxious, perhaps as a professional developer. Okay, that's getting smaller and smaller. What's going to happen? So if we really think of that as here's an ongoing income, and around this much every year is going to go towards that really important thing, what I would say is the single most important way that we support teachers and in turn support students in that work. I appreciate seeing it called out that way, and I'd love to see that continue. And the last thing I want to comment on is the same equity thing that Mr. Drop called out on. I'm sure this isn't meant to be an exhaustive list of equity initiatives, but the supports and the family engagement, all important, and attendance and discipline important. Attendance and discipline in school climate could really be dealing with the structural changes that need to happen. They could be connected, and I don't necessarily know that any of that systemic work that we may be doing as a district is a big dollar amount. I don't think it's necessarily an expensive work. It's just a commitment to the work. And so if there is going to be a cost with that, I'd like to see that called out as well. I think it just makes it a more explicit commitment to that work. That's it. Thanks.
All right, Mr. Dauber.
Thank you for this. I'm partly satisfied. And I'll explain what I mean by that. This really is helpful in sort of setting out the kind of lay of the land and the categories of interest and expenditure. I think it gets us closer to where I would like to be, which is to understand where staff's thinking is, and specifically, I think probably the superintendent's thinking about how this budget reflects the strategic priorities that we've set, and the promises in the promise. What choices in terms of at the margin where you want to put expenditures are reflected in this budget, or you're thinking to this point that, for example, we call out equity, we call out special education, there's staffing ratios. How are you weighing those against each other in deciding where to spend dollars? That I would like to get that level of understanding. I think this is a great framework for understanding that. But what I'm not yet seeing is, you've got some flexibility. How are you proposing that we use it? Or we have some flexibility. How are you proposing that we use it? Am I making sense about that?
Yeah, I'm actually taking notes as all of you are speaking, and one thing I can already see is that while we spent time on the grouping, I can already envision a regrouping that can really capture some of this, and we can also call out some other assumptions that are historic or recently added that hit on some of these categories. So if you're looking at a bucket like equity and you see three things, I have a list of another 6 that we could have put on there, including $3 million through LCAP, which is dedicated for exactly that work. But I understand what you're saying about the promise. And just one quick thought on that. The beauty of the promise is we've narrowed the focus so significantly that it gets us out of laundry list. So it's actually very easy to target, and we're going to call out some more things that are on this list that probably don't have enough context for everyone right now. Like number 29, I would say, is one of the most powerful things on the entire list, and you have almost no explanation or context at this point.
Yeah, that's one that I have expenditures for special education will be driven by staffing ratios and student IEPs, which is clearly true, but how is that?
Very revealing.
Well, staffing ratios, so have you considered a range of staffing ratios and you've settled on one?
He's actually referring to the second thing on the list, I think, the program specialist.
Oh, I see, okay.
So I can tell you, I'm not going to get into that item right now. That's going to come back at another time. But I can tell you that is a reflection of the number one recommendation from special ed as it relates to the next iteration of the promise. So that is an example of something that's very powerful, and it's sitting in there. You just don't have the context for it yet.
Yeah, and I would like to see the context, and I'd like to see, for the other areas of the promise where presumably you have a list of possible, at least for some, you have a list of possible expenditures that you decided not to do because you think that the impact of them is lower than the things that you did decide to do, either for that area or for some other area. I think it would be instructive for us to understand that thinking and to react to it, either by supporting it or by, raising questions. Thanks.
Yeah, I was confused in my comments. You can talk, and then I want to come back at the end, because,
Okay.
yeah.
So why don't we go to student comments? All right, Mr. Gordon?
First of all, thank you for coming to us with this presentation. A lot of really interesting information in here that I don't quite understand, but I think that's okay. I wanted to highlight number 24. I think I'm not the first person to do so in terms of early morning breakfast. And I've a first pretty simple question is there a reason that these schools were highlighted? And then secondly, last year when I was on Pali Site Council, I worked with Miss Lucy Philpott to introduce kind of an early morning program for students on our high school campus that did include what we wanted to have as a breakfast, but we didn't know how to fund it. We didn't know essentially who to ask. We didn't know where to go from there. And so we ended up launching this program as just kind of an opportunity to have kids inside and not sitting outside. And we missed out on the early morning breakfast opportunity. So essentially my question today is, and I know that program's still running, is do secondary level schools have the opportunity to get engaged in that funding? And that doesn't have to be answered today, but I would like to know the answer to that at some point. It's all from me.
All right, Ms. Chang.
I am even more unknowledgeable about this than Ben is. So I don't think I have any more comments. Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Bain-Caswell, did you want to?
Do you want to go first?
No?
I guess I thought this was basically a rollover budget with a couple of little things on it. And if we found out that we had more money, you were going to come back to us with what additional things you'd like to invest in based on the promise, and we would discuss that. Am I not understanding this correctly?
So I get where there can be some confusion. So at some point in time, we're going to have an adjustment to our property tax revenues. We would anticipate that will truly look like an additional income or revenue for us. Our assumption right now in the report is that's not going to happen.
Right, so that's just a rollover then?
That is a rollover assumption. Now, some of the assumptions in this report we know are not going to pan out the way they're written. That would be a perfect example of one. So there could be some programmatic increases there. Absent that, the revenue increases or budget is outlined in your assumptions. It is what you see in front of you.
So I guess I want to key off something that Mr. Dauber said, and that is, where are you making trade-off decisions here?
Right. So That was not something that we had in this initial report, but I can tell you, we have made some, and they're on a list in front of me right now, and I'd like to bring those back in the next
That makes complete sense. So the next meeting, we'll be talking about those kind of things.
There are some pretty significant topics, yes.
Okay.
All right, any other comments on this? Okay, so usually we take a break around this time. We have one substantial item left, but I think maybe we should take our break anyway. Do people agree? Okay, so why don't we take a 5-minute,
Don't you have anything to say?
no?
No.
So why don't we take a 5-minute break and be back at 8:36 according to the old digital clock on the wall over there. All right, it's 8:37. Do.
All right. We've got a quorum.
Yeah, we do. Ms. Baden-Caswell's hanging out chocolate. All right. Oh, no, I thought she was coming.
Oh, thank you, Melissa.
Oh, it's in the packet?
It's in the packet, yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you. Is it in, posted online too?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Everything that gets in here gets in.
Oh, so it's in board docs?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. All right, thank you. All right, so we're back in session, and now we'll get to go on to item 7B, middle school science instruction material adoption. Dr. Austin.
Okay. Thank you. I'd like to thank our teachers for being with us tonight. First of all, I'm guilty of poking holes in a lot of things and talking all the time about systems we don't have. Our system for textbook and materials adoption is so awesome that in Palos Verdes, they call it the Don Austin system because I stole it from Palo Alto about 4 years ago and took all credit for it, by the way. So thank you to the great work here in Palo Alto. But when I look through this from a process lens, when the process is great, I don't have any questions, right? With the right people are in the room and the process is followed, I feel very comfortable. And that's about all I have to say on this one. I'm going to turn it over. I've seen the presentation, I've seen the work, and I really appreciate everything everyone's done. So Ms. Sofek.
Thank you. So the middle school Next Generation Science Instructional Materials Selection Advisory Committee, it's a mouthful, is happy to be either here tonight or watching online to share with you the results of their work over the past 18 months and to share a recommendation for adoption with you. This committee is comprised of students, staff, parents, and they have been working diligently to assess the possible pilot curricula for adoption. Before turning things over to Secondary TOSA Tammy Wallace, who will elaborate on our process and our outcomes, I would like to share that the programs piloted were included on the State Board of Education's approved list, which they released in November of 2018. These programs are multifaceted and include resources that span beyond just a textbook. Using feedback from teachers who piloted the programs, students, and parents, we were able to arrive at a recommendation for you tonight, and we're proud of the work we have done and happy to share with you the outcome and our journey. So, Tammy.
Thank you, Ms. Sofek. I would also like to say a special thanks, especially to the members of the committee who are here tonight and many of them that are watching on the web. I just hope that the students are watching along. Special thanks to Raina, Sangeet, Alan, and Ishan. I really appreciated this enthusiastic committee. They really embraced a sense of inquiry, and they really had a very good sense of active listening, so it was really a joy to lead them through this process. We had 4 goals, and these informed our essential questions and were incorporated into surveys and discussions. First, to reflect the changes in curriculum and instruction explained in the state science framework and in the Next Generation Science Standards. Additionally, to address diversity of learners in PAUSD, be useful to teachers as they teach and support students as they learn. The first round of pilots, teachers and students used TCI and McGraw science units. This data was not conclusive, so piloting was extended into the fall with Amplify and HMH programs. In each time period, at least half of the science teachers piloted using physical textbooks, workbooks, digital platforms, and science kits. Surveys were given to students in class. Links for parents of those students were sent home via Infinite Campus. Finally, the piloting group of teachers filled out feedback forms. There are copies of the teacher survey data in the board packet for all 4 programs piloted. As you can see, there were a variety of units at each grade level, and there is a special note explaining a 2-part plan for piloting HMH that can be read in the board enclosure and in the 6161.1 compliance matrix. These categories reflect the California Science Framework criteria for instructional materials: alignment with NGSS, program organization, assessment, access and equity, and instructional planning and support. Each category is further brought to light by a handful of sub-questions and open-ended comments on the teacher feedback survey. I would especially like to recognize each middle school science teacher for their thoughtful comments and evaluation on this detailed form. This slide shows the two publishers with the strongest teacher results side by side for comparison. Of note for Amplify is the greater percentages denoted by blue and purple bars. This represents the excellent or very good scores. In this final data slide, we show the results for the question on the teacher survey. What is your overall rating for this curriculum? When teachers were asked to give reasons for their preference, the top 4 reasons for Amplify were NGSS lesson design, science content, reading material for students, and online features. In December of 2018, we chose the top 2 out of 5 in our screening process for pilots 1 and 2. These pilots were underway when Ed Reports released a first wave of reviews for middle school science materials. That spring, our committee decided that the pilots for 1 and 2 were not conclusive enough to recommend adoption at that time. To pivot into a phase 2 of piloting, we reflected on our original reviews, but we also considered this third-party evaluation. The strong Ed Reports scores for Amplify were an additional data point to consider. The comments shared on Ed Reports are consistent with the observations of PAUSD piloting teachers and offer additional validation that this curriculum has a unique and valuable approach. In summary, this committee recommends the adoption of the California edition of Amplify Science for all 3 grades: Earth and Space Science, Life Science, and Physical Science. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Okay, I don't think that we have any cards for this, so it's board member question and comments, and Mr. Dauber, you're up.
I appreciate the thorough report and the careful work by the committee, and I see no reason not to accept the recommendation.
I love our process. Glad you love our process too. I know it's a lot of work to go through this, but we end up with these books for a long time. So it's really, you're doing great things for our kids by doing this much vetting ahead of time. I'm really happy that Ed Reports lined up with what we were finding too. That's always helpful when that happens. We've had times where that hasn't happened, so that's good. Creates less controversy. I'm, very supportive of this choice. There is always gaps in textbooks. There's no perfect textbook. And clearly, the state textbook, the ones they put on the list didn't come out till November. So we're sort of early on in the textbook development process for these standards. Maybe if you could share how you're going to supplement where you see gaps, what the process will be for that, because I know you well, you always do.
Well, first of all, we won't know completely where we think we need to provide additional supports until we have a run through with the program. Part of bringing this earlier to you than originally anticipated is in recognition of that. Like, the sooner we get the materials, the more likely we are to be able to put together an implementation plan and have teachers work on creating, a pacing guide and a course scope and sequence, et cetera. One thing you'll notice in the actual board item is this time we are actually coming with a supplemental item along with this one. So we are currently using Gizmos as a supplemental item in the interim, and that program we are already aware of and work with, and it will be able to support us in places where Amplify, we found, less than perfect for us. So we already know that, which is our teachers were really amazing. I mean, nothing better than a group of scientists to do some analysis on this, right? So, we already know that that's part of our program that we need to supplement with right off the bat, and they're willing to work with us already.
Sort of going to the equity topic. Since we know that 2 areas that are going to be need a little extra help with these books, or at least that's what the comment said. One was on differentiation, and one was on the complexity of the language that's in the books. So, the difficulty in reading the academic language in these books. Is Gizmos going to be able to provide support in those areas?
Well, Gizmos is a hands-on lab tool that allows you to digitally manipulate a lab environment. So it's all about being hands-on. In regard to the readability of a text or a literacy element, a lot of the feedback was related to the way in which Amplify instructs teachers to use those passages, I'll call them, where they are able to be scaffolded and that they are it relies on those passages to have annotations made, and then they do some conversation and exploration and thought processing around some really cool or compelling phenomena, and then they come back to the passage and read it together again at the end. So it's implementing a program with fidelity that will also help with the readability of the text. But we're looking for that. I mean, we know we have some comments from our staff about that.
Okay, well, I'm interested in whatever we need to do to invest in that, because I want to make sure that we're focusing on equity on our science program.
Yep.
Such a robust evaluation makes our job a lot easier. So thank you, and I'm going to vote to accept the recommendation.
Thank you to the whole committee for all of your work. Yesteryear, I served on the Elementary Math Adoption Committee, and it was a really great process to see the curricula that we considered and the different steps that were taken and piloting in different ways and how evaluation was done. It was tremendous. And so I feel really comfortable with all the work that you've all done. Excited to support it. It looks like if I read the implementation plan right, there are 4 days of training included in the adoption. So the only extra cost we're looking at is the sub coverage time.
Correct.
And then developing the other extra stuff, curriculum.
Right,
writing,
there's additional
right?
pieces.
That additional piece. And for right now, I mean, I know it's not a huge number, right? We're talking middle school science teachers, but is that budget assumption in our PD budget for next year, or actually some of it will happen this year? No.
We have NGSS implementation as part of the promise for K-12, actually, so you'll see that reflected in our PD plans.
Okay, great, thanks. I have no questions.
Great. Student board members, Mr. Gordon.
No comments from me, but thank you to the committee. I would name it if I could, but.
Yeah, similar. I don't have any comments. Thank you.
Okay. Should we bring this back on consent next time? Is there any reason not to?
I think everyone's
Okay.
indicated their
All right,
support.
so the agenda committee will take that under advisory. All right, thank you. Thank you all. All right, so that's it for discussion items, and now we're on to information items. These items are presented for information only. There's no staff report or action to be taken. Board members have indicated the items they'd like to speak to, so we'll move to those items directly. And the first is item C, the safety update, and Ms. DeBrienza and Ms. Bedden-Caswell both indicated this one.
I just wanted to acknowledge, I don't know if people clicked through and watched the video, the safety video that we've made.
Yeah.
But I thought it was really great because over the past few years, I've often been asked, what are our plans? And either I didn't have an answer, or I just had to say, oh, great, you've caught me, a board member, because Dr. Austin told me X, so I can tell you. There was just no systematic way of letting people know that we are looking at safety in a systematic way. And it was cute. It was great. It had a lot of information in it. So I just wanted to acknowledge that it's out there. And so if you go into our board packet and look under this item, there's a link, and you can watch a little 2.5-minute video.
Is it on the website somewhere? I assume it is, right?
It's
All right, because I don't think our board docs is not a best-selling webpage.
That's
so.
true. That's
But
true.
I'm sure I liked it too.
Yeah.
I thought it was great.
That was it. No questions. Thank you.
My question was on preparing for coronavirus, and you hit on it in your superintendent's report. I assume after you hear from the county superintendent, you'll be giving us some more information? Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other comments on safety? Okay, the only other item then was the board calendar item where I was going to report back on the items that we talked about last time and kind of let everybody know where they settled out. So, and I have my original notes of like the ones I wrote down, so let me know if I miss any. So special education, so most of these items have just been added to a future board calendar. Special education will be on March 31st. SAFE/Student Coaching Initiative will be on May 12th. The county assessor presentation will be on March 31st. Mental health services is on May 12th. Suicide prevention is on March 17th. Homework policies, which we did already talk about on 11/19, will be talked about on 3/31. There were 3 other items that were listed that aren't on a future agenda at this point. One was Barron Park and Escondido progress report, which I had asked for, and Dr. Austin convinced me that we should put the principals through another dog and pony to come and talk to us, which I think is fine. The others were the high school counseling and the SEL programs, and I think particularly you want to talk about the high school counseling?
Yeah, specifically high school counseling. Trying to frame up a report right now, we could probably work through something, but my thought is we're going to have 2 new high school principals. We're going to have Kathy Lawrence come here as the director. It is definitely going to be a priority area, going back and readdressing counseling. And then as I thought through this, high school counseling, while definitely on our radar, was not a priority area, meaning that we did not put any efforts behind it to push for a change in result or student impact. So my recommendation is that we would move that to next year when we actually have efforts behind it and can frame up a better item for you.
Any comments or feedback on that?
Yeah, and I appreciate that. We didn't explicitly make it something that we wanted. With the turnover in superintendents over the last couple of years, I think that there have been some multi-year goals, and this is one of them that we haven't necessarily, I mean, I've just sort of, particularly on this one where the board says said we weren't going to micromanage how it was done, we just wanted to know that progress was being made. And I think we need to talk about how we make sure when we have a multi-year deliverable, particularly if people change along the way, how do we keep track of it? I actually think on the counseling, it's likely that we've made some progress because I think at the site levels, work has been done. This is more just a reporting on our progress. So that might be something that staff thinks about with you on, you know, is there some sort of interim thing that you can talk to us about before next year when the new principals come out, or is there some research you could do at the end of the year? I mean, really research, maybe some questions that are asked so that we start the year with some information. I'm not looking for an answer right now. I'm just trying to figure out how we don't lose the thread on something that was pretty important to our community.
Right. No, it's well taken, and I understand, and this is not the first example of what you're
Oh, of course it's not.
explaining. It's something we need to really think about.
Although I think moving ahead, most of our priorities that are identified wind up in the promise. So I think really this is an issue of things that were started before Dr. Austin was here, before we had the promise. And so just bridging those issues. But I think that moving forward, it wouldn't be as much of a problem.
It could be, though. It could. I mean, I can't pick something specifically, but some of our work, particularly around equity, it's going to take multiple years to happen.
Yes, it will.
And if we're not going to get micromanaging reports on things, then we just need a way that we can be sure we've seen the progress.
Yeah, I think that we had, well, I know because I was deeply involved in this. We had a situation 6-7 years ago where we had very significant differences in outcomes between the 2 high schools, in basically every possible outcome of counseling, from academic counseling to supports for student emotional health, and there were many, many different dimensions. And there was a very stark difference between the PALI system of teacher advisory and the GUN very traditional counseling model of guidance counselors. And it was not working as well for GUN students as for PALI students. And the board, there was a lot of discussion of it. It was a hugely sort of important and time-consuming area for discussion at the board level. And one consequence of that, and was the, I think, but there were other antecedents for this, was the change in counseling at GUN and the adoption of an advisory model that has, I think at this point, fully rolled out across the grade levels. And I'll also point to a board policy that I think predated all of this, but basically says that requires that we have equivalent outcomes for the two for counseling for the high schools. I think one of the things that's interesting about counseling is that this was particularly true 6, 7, 8 years ago, but it's still to some extent true that this is one of the only areas, maybe the only area where we have significantly different models of delivering services between the two high schools. Or between any of our schools, except for our choice schools, and which is why the question arises in the first place. So there's a kind of a baseline question, which Ms. Baton-Caswell is alluding to, which is, okay, we made all these changes. We think it's probably better. Is it better? And how better is it? And I think that's the question that I have is, where are we on this commitment? And are there, I think for staff, an important question is, should we continue to have two different models? Why do we have two different models? Are students paying a cost for having two different models? So that's the kind of basic information that I'm interested in getting. And then I think there's a question that we can address is, well, should we have a goal around this to make things different, or are we good? So that I think is, I'm uncomfortable not knowing the answer to the question, have we closed the gap? So,
And there's just one more thing, and that is that the superintendent at the time said to me, and I'm sure said to other board members, are we where we want to be, even with the model that's getting better satisfaction on our surveys? And the answer was no.
So the question I guess I'd have is, it's a pacing question, as Dr. Austin likes to put it. Is this a this year question, sitting like basically at the beginning of March with, 3 months left in school? Or is it a next year question? Because I know how Dr. Austin doesn't like to take staff resources off of the this year issues and put them onto issues during the year.
It's certainly a way that a new principal can get to know their school very well.
Yeah.
To come in and
point.
first look at that.
I mean, Ms. Lawrence has the distinct advantage of being very familiar with both of these.
And she'll be the head of secondary next year.
Yeah, exactly.
So she's not going anywhere.
Yeah, I'm really first trying to establish what it is that I think needs to happen, which is that we need to know what the baseline is. Do we have a gap or not in outcomes? And I think that's work that doesn't need, the most important part of that work is doing the analysis and understanding, not coming back and telling us about it. I suspect that nobody really knows the answer to that question, because the way that we used to know it kind of was through strategic plan surveys and so forth, and I don't think those questions are being asked anymore of students. So I think the first question, which I think you folks should really be concerned about, is, are these models of service delivery that we're spending a lot of money on, and are they working equivalently for students? And then if they are, then I think you can tell us that whenever.
But should they figure it out this year or next year? That's the question.
Well, I think they should, I don't think that if I were you, and we can talk about what the board thinks, but if I were staff, and I'd kind of like to hear staff response to that, I wouldn't want to wait until next year to start to answer that question. I'd want to figure out now how to answer the question and be ready so that we're ready next year. What I don't think we should do is next year start to think about answering the question and maybe get to an answer towards the end of next year and not be able to do anything about it, even to strategize around priorities for it.
Rather than maybe answering this right this second, well, let me start with something. The way that we decided that things were out of whack was based on satisfaction from the users, from the students and the parents. And the satisfaction measures were very different. So when you say outcomes, it's not like we're measuring test scores or something. That was how we were measuring.
Yeah, I mean, we were looking at student reports about service delivery. It wasn't just, are you happy with this? It's, do you get timely advice about course selection?
So keep in mind, what we're agendized for and talking about is board calendar for
Right.
this year. So
Yeah, so I'm answering, I'm answering the question, when should we do this?
Yeah, right.
So the answer is, it's okay with me for this not to come back to the board this year, but it's not okay for me for it to come back next year with a sort of a, yeah, you're right, we should figure this out, and we'll get back to you, in time to do something about it the following year. I think we have enough history here and enough, we have this anomaly, frankly, that we have these two different models of service delivery in our two high schools, and so that raises the question, which frankly we should just know the answer to. It's a bug that we don't know the answer to the question, are they equally good? And so I would like us to know the answer to that next year in time enough to set some priorities around addressing it if we need to.
So if there's a way to measure it at the beginning of next year or at the end of this year, so that then some work can be done before you bring it to the board to talk about, that would be good. I don't think you need to bring it to the board to talk about either until sometime next year. I think that would be okay, but not at the end of next year.
Yeah.
Okay, that sounds good.
What do you think, Dr. Austin?
Got it all figured out. No, let's start seriously for a second. I think guidance is the heartbeat of a high school, period. As a principal, I always personally oversaw guidance. I wasn't a counselor by training, but I knew that's where the heartbeat of the school is. So I don't think you're misplacing importance. I think it is the most important part of getting kids in the right, not just the right classes, but when done properly, it's essential. I do have a few thoughts. I just accepted an invitation from the guidance department to go over, and we're just going to have an informal conversation. They invited me today, ironically. So I'd like to know a little bit more about it, and it is definitely a part of our principal selection process as well. But I think I have enough information to get my head wrapped around it. I do want to get more clarity later about what outcomes we're looking at, because I agree it's not a satisfaction survey, and I can tell you my conversations with our students in the Superintendent's Advisory Council are a 180 from the results that came out when this report started. So that gives me even more questions to ask of them about the models.
Well, and that's why I brought up that the superintendent at the time asked me if either was good enough. So
I mean, I don't have any judgment about the answer. So I appreciate the seriousness that you're taking it. I don't think that we need to get something back this year. I'm happy that that Ms. Lawrence is going to be in this role. I would expect that you would want to start, working on this seriously this year so that we're ready next year to have an informed conversation.
Makes sense.
All right. If there are no other comments, we'll move on
wait,
to.
there was one more item, Ben. That was, I'm going to Sacramento to Cal SSD, and they're talking about the priorities for which they're lobbying for suburban school districts. I'd like to have a conversation before I go to the May meeting about the priorities that they're putting out. I don't think we have to vote on them, but I think it would be helpful to just have some input so that I can be a productive part of the conversation.
Okay, it sounds like that's something that would need to be board member led as opposed to staff led?
Yeah, it would, and I need to see if I can get an early copy of the priorities so that we can have the conversation.
Yeah, I think, so when would you like to, in May? I mean, when does this, should this be on the calendar?
Probably the last meeting in April, because the meeting is May 7th for
I think we only have
CalSSD.
one count. We have one April meeting, right? April 21st?
April 21st, let's put it on for April 21st.
All right.
Yeah, if that works for
And from,
calendar people.
just to make sure staff sleeps at night, this is,
They don't have to do
Ms.
any work at all.
Bacon-Caswell's
I would just
list.
share the priorities and people can,
okay.
we could just discuss them.
All right, very good. All right. So any other, I think that was it on the list.
I can just report quickly that Larry Stone was just moved to April 21st also.
Yep.
I'm sorry, what was?
Larry Stone, he's
The
the
county assessor.
assessor. He was unavailable for the date we had him on there, but he is confirmed for April 21st.
I don't think the CalSSD thing needs to be a long discussion. I think it could be pretty short.
That's okay. All right, so if that's it on that, we can move to board operations. Mr. Durham.
Great. Everyone has a copy of the report from the property committee's last meeting.
Thank you for that.
Other than the items that were discussed on today's board agenda, briefly, the committee discussed air conditioning at elementary and middle schools, discussed elementary, oh, sorry. The property,
Pull that down to your mouth.
I'm reading from the property committee's report to the board. The committee met on February 18th and discussed, in addition to two items that were on the board agenda today, air conditioning at elementary and middle schools, and elementary special education classrooms. The committee also discussed the work of the BBAC and the overlap between the two bodies, as well as agenda setting for the BBAC. And you will likely be happy to know that the BBAC has a very optimistic goal of getting through all of the educational specifications by the end of this academic year.
Great. That's it?
That's it.
Wonderful. Mr. Brianza.
Well, Mr. Drop already told us about the property committee. Last week, we had city school liaison. Was that last week? That was last week. And maybe there'll be a sort of summary coming.
It's actually in the, I got it out early. It is in the board doc and in the printed board packet.
I didn't see it there.
For a
I
change.
missed it.
I didn't see it either.
Nice. Okay, great. The only other thing coming up, I mentioned this last time, but wanted to mention it again, that each of our two high schools has a scholarship foundation, a scholarship fund for students who get into college but can't necessarily pay for it. Guns is Gun Foundation and Pally's is Rise Together Education. And Rise Together Education's fundraiser is coming up on Friday, March 20th at a winery in, I'm going to say Redwood City, somewhere, San Carlos maybe, San Carlos. And they're going to have a silent auction and a live auction and wine tasting and whatnot. So I think that the organization at Pally is, I think of it as playing a little bit of catch up. I think Guns Foundation has been around a lot longer and they have a little bit, I'm going to call it an endowment, but they have some money saved up that just kicks off some scholarship money every year. And Pally's organization is a lot newer and they don't have the same resources. So just trying to put in a little plug to make sure we support them both.
Excellent. Mr. Domer.
In the spirit of the committee reports, we met, Mr. Durop led the BPRC, I think, to a record close. I don't know, it's like 35 minutes or something like that, so. Yeah.
How many
No, he's-
policies?
I don't know, 47, something like that? No, it was actually, was it 7 or 8?
Nice.
So there you go.
Efficiency.
That's it.
Anything else? Okay. I attended the Pally Fish Bowl today on vaping. It was interesting to see. I think that some of what was talked about could easily be reinforced with some sort of written Q&A. And Ben and I had talked about that afterwards. It was all freshmen, they're sort of like, they don't necessarily remember what they hear without sort of a repetition. but I thought it was a nice way to do it. And I think that the more of those kind of things and the more small group discussions you have on issues that you want students to pay attention to, the more they will actually take away. The Ledge Brunch for the Santa Clara County School Boards Association is on Saturday.
That stands for legislative brunch.
The legislative brunch.
I like
For
the
those that
insider,
yeah, the
insider
insider
lingo. I like it.
lingo.
Yeah.
Not only is there a great group of legislators coming that you can ask them all the questions you want, we have put a call out for any questions you'd like to be answered ahead of time so that they can actually prep for it. So even if you're not coming and you have some questions you want to put to legislators, send them in to Bonnie Mace. She sent an email out today that you should have all received. Are you going, Ms. Chow, to the SF Squared Symposium?
I have it on my calendar, and I have a few conflicting events on that same day, so I'm trying to go.
Okay, well, I will be there with you if you're there, or I'll be there by myself. And the legislative action day that I talked about last time is March 17th, which is also a board meeting day, so might fall asleep at the board. No, I won't fall asleep at the board meeting, but it's in Sacramento. If there's some legislation you're concerned about, please let me know about it so I make sure that I'm talking about that. And I went to RAFT the other day. Do you know of RAFT, Dr. Austin? It's the resource area for teachers. And they have a lot of science projects and maker kind of space projects for teachers, and then all sorts of extra things that companies have gotten rid of, everything from desks to shelving to printers, all sorts of things. The reason I went over there is they are planning for a new program, which is to do science camps this summer, and they're talking about putting a series of science camps in at Ravenswood, and it might be to our benefit to talk to them and see if we can get our some of our HUR students invited to those science camps, assuming that they actually get this going. It's not fully going yet.
This is for the summer?
This is this summer.
No, it's funny, because they have Camp Galileo over there.
Well,
For historical
they
day
rent to Camp Galileo, so.
They do a deal with the Boys and Girls Club where they do a,
Oh, this would actually be at one of the Ravenswood schools.
so, yeah, so it's, never.
So it would be in addition to,
Okay.
it wouldn't be instead of.
Yep, interesting. Thank you. I think all my stuff has been reported. I really appreciate the fact that people are kind of doing the committee stuff and doing the reporting. I think it is making us more efficient and hopefully more effective, more importantly. And like, you know, the property committee being able to review all those things, especially when we have big items come like we come today and like we did today, and be able to have confidence that those have been thoroughly vetted. I think that's, I take great comfort in that, so I really appreciate that. And I think I had one more thing, but I can't remember what it was. So, I will be coming to the Ledge Brunch. I will see you at the Ledge
Awesome.
Brunch.
And do you have some questions ahead of time?
Now I have my homework assignment for
Yeah,
the Ledge
okay,
Brunch.
great.
All right, so with that, no other business, we're adjourned.